Hey Algebra 1, and thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to be looking at Lesson 9.3, Part 1, Solving Quadratic Equations Using Square Roots. Today we're going to be looking for 9 things in our notes, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to look at is what happens when we're solving for a square root. So if we're looking at the equation x squared is equal to d, we're just going to figure out how many solutions are there actually possible. So as we're looking at this, if d is greater than 0, then d has two real solutions, or x has two real solutions. We have the positive square root of d or the negative square root of d. If d is equal to 0, x will have one solution, that's just equal to 0. And then if d is less than 0, like a negative, then there are no real solutions. Let's go ahead and take time now to pause the video here so you can write down number 1. And then once you're done, click play to go on and see how it's done. So here are just a few examples of how we would begin to solve. And it says solve each using square roots. So the very first thing in letter A I would do is just get the square root by itself. So what I'm going to do is add 27 to both sides. So I'm going to get 3x squared is equal to 27. Let me write a little neater there. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 3 to get x by itself. So I'm going to have x squared is equal to 9. And that just means I'm going to find basically the square root of both of these. So the square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 9 can be a positive 3 or a negative 3. So I have two solutions. Because I can say negative 3 times negative 3 is equal to 9, and I can also say that 3 times 3 is equal to 9. That's how those will work out. For letter B, I'm going to again go ahead and solve for x using square roots. I'm going to add 10 to both sides. So I get x squared is equal to 0, and when I find the square root of both of those, x will just be equal to 0, meaning I have one solution. The last one, when I start to solve this, I'm going to subtract 11 from both sides, and I get negative 5x squared is equal to 5. And then I'm going to divide both sides by negative 5. X squared is going to be equal to negative 1, and because d is less than 0, these I have to say is going to have to say no real solution here. Just because no number times itself will give me a negative 1, you can only multiply a negative times a negative or a positive times a positive here, and both of those results will end in a positive number. So here are 3 that you're going to try. Again, go ahead and solve like you solved before, where you're solving the equation using square roots. Let's go ahead and pause here so you can try it by yourself, and then once you're done, click play. Alright, so for number 2, to get x by itself, I'm going to divide both sides by negative 3. So I'm going to get x squared is equal to 25. And then I'm going to find the square root of 25. So I'm going to have x can be equal to a positive or a negative 5. For number 3, I started solving by subtracting 12 from both sides. And I got x squared is equal to negative 2. Again here, because d is less than 0, I can only write no real solution for number 3. And then number 4, I'm going to add 15 to both sides to start solving. So I'll get 4x squared equals 0. Still, if you want to, you could divide by 4 here. You still get x squared is equal to 0, which means x would be equal to 0. So that would be one real solution. Okay? The next thing we're going to look at is what happens when we get something that looks like this, where we have a binomial being squared. So I have x minus 1 in parentheses squared is equal to 25. One thing you can do here is you can go ahead and find the square root of both sides. So I'm going to find the square root of x minus 1 squared and the square root of 25. X minus 1 squared is just x minus 1. And then the square root of 25 can be a positive 5, but it can also be a negative 5. So what we're essentially going to do is solve for x when this is equal to 5 and when it's equal to negative 5. So I'm going to do x minus 1 equals 5, and then x minus 1 equals negative 5. So you're going to get two answers here. The first one, when I add 1 to both sides, I'm going to get x is equal to 6. The second one, when I add 1 to both sides, I'm going to get x is equal to -4. So my two solutions are x is equal to -6 and x is equal to -4. So here are 3 that you're going to get to try, 5, 6, and 7. Again, go ahead and find the square root of both sides and then solve for both possible answers. Let's go ahead and pause here so you can try this on your own. Alright, so for number 5, the first thing you did was started off using finding the square root of both sides. So we have x plus 7 is equal to 0. You can't have a positive or a negative 0, so this one actually you're only going to get one solution. Number 5's answer, x is equal to -7. For number 6, what I would suggest first is maybe dividing by 4 to get the parentheses or the binomial by itself. So I'm going to do that first, and I'm going to get, these will cancel out, so x minus 3 squared is equal to 9/4. And then I'll find the square root of both sides. So I'll have x minus 3 is equal to positive -3 halves, because the square root of 9 is 3, square root of 4 is 2. Now I'm just going to set both of my answers equal to a positive answer and a negative answer. So I have x minus 3 is equal to positive 3 halves, x minus 3 is equal to -3 halves. If I add 3 for this first one, remember 3 halves is just 1 1/2, so that might actually make it a little bit easier for you. The first answer I get is 4 1/2, and then I'm going to change this to -1 1/2. And then if I add 3 on this side, I'm going to get x is equal to 1 1/2. So my two answers for 6 are 4 1/2 and 1 1/2. And then the last one for number 7, again, let's start off by finding the square root of both sides. So I have 2x plus 1 is equal to positive -6. Now I'm going to go ahead and set both of these equal to a positive and a -6. So I have 2x plus 1 equals 6 and 2x plus 1 equals -6. I'm going to go and start solving by subtracting 1 from both sides. For this first one, I get 2x is equal to 5. So x is equal to 5 halves, or 2 1/2. And then over here, when I subtract 1, I get 2x equals -7. So that means x is equal to -7 halves for that second part. So these are my two solutions for number 7. The last few we're going to look at is what happens when we need a calculator to approximate a square root. So you're going to solve the same exact way that you've been seeing, but you're going to notice that you don't get a perfect square. And we're going to be rounding to the nearest hundredth as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this equation, 4x squared minus 13 is equal to 15, and then go ahead and try to get x by itself. I'm going to add 13 to both sides first, and I get 4x squared is equal to 28. And then when I divide by 4, I get x squared is equal to 7. I still am going to solve the same way here. Take the square root of both sides, so I have x is equal to the positive or negative square root of 7. Here's when you can take your calculator and type in the number 7 and hit the square root symbol or the radical symbol, and you'll get a decimal. And when you get that decimal, you're just going to round it to the nearest hundredth. So x is approximately positive 2.65 and negative 2.65. Okay, so that's all we're going to do here. This is the nice part about it, is you don't have to think about what the square root of 7 or do a trial and error. You just get to plug that into the calculator. So what we're going to go ahead and do is try 8 and 9, similar to what we just saw on the previous screen. Remember, you're going to round your answer to the nearest hundredth once you're done. So let's go ahead and pause here so you can try them. Alright, so for number 8, we're going to subtract 8 first. And we get x squared is equal to 11. That means x will be equal to the positive negative square root of 11. And then when we type that into our calculator, the square root of 11 rounded to the nearest hundredth would be a positive 3.32 and a negative 3.32. Okay. Number 9, we're going to go ahead and add 2 to both sides. So I get 5x squared is equal to 2. Divide both sides by 5, I get x squared is equal to 2/5. Because this is a fraction, what I would do is actually change this to a decimal. 2/5 is equal to 0.4, which will be a little bit easier to find the square root of than 2/5 on your calculator that's provided to you. If I go ahead and find the square root of both of these, 0.4, and then type the square root sign in, I'm going to get x is approximately, and that should be plus minus, a positive 0.63 and a negative 0.63. Okay, and we always use the approximation symbol because we are rounding, and since these are not perfect squares, they're technically decimals that go on and on and on and on and on. That's going to conclude our notes for today. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.